Zelensky has called on foreigners from all over the world to join in his Ukrainian Foreign Legion, and it seems to have worked. Thousands of people from Japan, USA, UK, India, Brazil and all sorts of countries have joined in the fight against Putin. On the other side, you may have probably heard that the Syrians and even some from Central African Republic have declared their willingness to join the Russians in Ukraine. Obviously, foreigners participating in wars is nothing new. In the Yugoslav wars, for instance, far-right Europeans joined the Croatians, Islamists joined the Bosnians, and Russians joined the Serbs. But there are strange stories from all sorts of conflicts, where people from far distant corners of the world unite to fight alongside each other. But first, lapses in security are clearly very important. Cybercriminals are getting more and more skilled and pose a greater threat than ever before. Meanwhile, our passwords are sometimes the only thing keeping these criminals away from our info and finances. Thankfully, NordPass is on hand. NordPass, however, is more than just a password manager. It's the essential cybersecurity tool that makes everyone's life easier and safer. However, if you get NordPass, you don't have to worry about remembering a bunch of complex passwords, as NordPass stores all of your passwords in one place, and its autofill feature actually makes signing in a lot quicker than before. So you can actually shop and browse faster, as they also secure credit card details, for instance, and their data breach scanner identifies where and when a leak may have happened and what data could be compromised. And there's no better time to get it, as if you sign up before March 22nd, you get 70% off NordPass Premium plus 1 month free if you go to nordpass.com/jabzy, or when using the link below, just use the code JABZY. And secure yourself online today with NordPass. So when trying to come up with some of the most interesting foreign legions, we could go straight to World War II and discuss the Indians serving in the Nazi army, or even the Russian emigres who served alongside the Japanese. Then of course the Spanish Civil War obviously had volunteers come from across the globe, but I feel that there's already a lot on them. But one from more recent history I'd like to highlight is the Islamic Legion, which was created by Gaddafi in the 1970s. He hoped to create an army of 1 million fighters with the goal of liberating Palestine, of toppling the reactionary regimes, of annihilating the borders, gates and barriers between the countries of the Arab homeland, and of creating the single Arab Jamahiriya from the ocean to the Gulf. Most of the fighters came from the poorer countries south of Libya, like Mali, Niger and the likes, but they were humiliated in the conflict with Chad in the 1980s and were disbanded in disgrace. However, I believe the 19th century and early 20th century had some of the most interesting foreign legions, like in the Second Boer War. The Boer struggle inspired a number of foreigners to join them. Germans and Dutch, who shared a common ancestry, flocked to South Africa, and this included Cornelis van Gogh, the brother of the painter. Then there were a number of Irish, Americans, French and even Scandinavians. But probably the strangest there were the Russians. These Russians were keen supporters of the Boer cause, not only because of their mutual enemy, but also because they believed that they shared similar values. As Tolstoy wrote in his diary, "Opening a paper every morning, I passionately wish to read that the Boers have beaten the British. It cheers my soul." Over 200 volunteered to fight against the British, and one of the first to arrive was Nico Bagriatoni, who was actually a Georgian nobleman, but born within the Russian Empire. He was given the title of Nico the Boer and promoted to the rank of colonel. But he did admit he didn't actually hear of Transvaal before the war, but once he did, he viewed it as his homeland. Another well-known adventurer was Yevgeny Maximov, who spent his life fighting in conflicts around the world, trying to remove the dishonor of being discharged from the army for attempting suicide. People from this upper class of Russian society wrongly convinced the Boers that they were able to influence the Tsar and could bring Russia into the war. But remember, this was less than 2 decades before the Russian Revolution, so there were some future Bolsheviks among the ranks as well, fighting against an imperial power. So princes and Bolsheviks fought side by side. Plus, on Nico the Boer, he was first exiled to St. Helena, then freed to return home. But he strangely managed to survive the Soviet purges and lived in Tbilisi with no money, selling cigarettes in his royal attire. Plus his daughter Irina would join the French resistance during World War II, so there's an interesting life there. Also, the Russians were joined by the Poles, who also saw a connection between themselves and the Boers. During carnivals they would sing Boer national anthems in Warsaw, shops had pictures of their leaders in the windows, and some people even dressed in their clothes. In the Warsaw Gazette they captured the romantic image shared by many. A Boer is a gallant and persistent warrior. From a young age he knows how to handle a weapon and doesn't fear any danger. He spends his whole life hunting or cultivating his farm and raising his cattle. He enjoys wide open spaces and gets ill in the city. He loves his country which he conquered with his own blood and will defend with his own blood. A Boer is a model husband and respects only those who are married and have children. So the Polish people living under Russian or German rule began to see the connections between the Boers and themselves, and over 200 of them would go and fight on their side. On the British side though, there was Gandhi, Churchill and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. But there was also Giuseppe Garibaldi II, the grandson of the unifier of Italy. He carried the sword of his grandparents which had been gifted to him by the working men of Tyneside. But one of the strangest volunteers in the British Army, I believe, happened back during the Zulu Wars. There, Louis Napoleon, the son of Napoleon III, fought and died alongside the British. So, a Bonaparte fought in British uniform. Yet it should be said that some French did fight alongside the British against Napoleon. These were the Chasseurs Britanniques, and they were present at the battles of Salamanca and Vittoria. However, going back to Garibaldi II, and in fact the Garibaldis in general, if you follow their lives you can see just how far volunteers travelled to fight. He, for instance, fought in the Balkan Wars, Mexican Revolution, alongside liberals in Venezuela, and with the Greeks against the Turks in 1897. As for his grandfather, he fought with his red shirts in Brazil as part of the Ragamuffin War, and in a civil war in Uruguay. Plus, he was also even offered a command position in the US Civil War as well. So it should come as no real surprise that Garibaldi legions were set up by various members of this family. For instance, during the Polish uprising against the Russians in the 1860s, you found Italians fighting for Polish freedom. And Menotti Garibaldi even tried to raise a legion to support the Egyptians' rebel against British influence in the Urabi Revolt. But Garibaldi did get help in return. During his expedition south, the British Legion joined him. However, it was said that they acted without discipline, as they were not accustomed to a country where wine is cheap. Plus, the Polish people formed the Mickiewicz Legion in 1848 to aid the Italian revolutionaries after theirs had failed. However, this was relatively small, and their Christian leader was primarily concerned with the end of the world approaching. So Italians and Poles could be found almost everywhere. I mean, even the Poles volunteered to join Napoleon and were sent to Haiti, but there many switched sides and joined in the slave rebellion. But probably the most well-travelled group of volunteer fighters, given their size, are the Irish. This tradition of Irish people fighting abroad goes right the way back. They joined the Scottish and serving in the French army in the 18th century, and they fought in the Spanish, Austrian, Polish and even the armies of the Italian states in the 17th century. Largely they fled the country after failed rebellions or British conquest, and this whole period is known as the Flight of the Wild Geese. There were so many of them who eventually settled down in their respective countries, you'll often see Irish names popping up in some strange places. For instance, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria was nearly assassinated had it not been for Maximilian Karl Lemuel O'Donnell. Or there was Joseph Cornelius O'Rourke, who fought Napoleon against his fellow Russians at the Battle of Austerlitz, or Bernardo O'Higgins, who helped lead Chile during their independence war. He was the son of Ambrosio O'Higgins, who was an Irish-born Spanish officer. In the 19th century, many Irish immigrants defected to the Mexican side during the Mexican-American War, and they formed the St. Patrick's Battalion. Irishmen would later launch raids across the Canadian border during the Fenian raids, and then they would serve on both sides of the US Civil War, and for that matter, even the later Spanish Civil War. But keeping on the US Civil War, and the Siamese man who made his way there. First though, in the middle of the 19th century, Europeans were advancing in Southeast Asia. So the King of Siam, Mong Gut, sent a letter to the Americans to try and gain an ally of sorts. James Buchanan therefore received gifts including elephant tusks and a sword, but there were also plans to gift elephants to the Americans. In a letter to the president, the king asked him to provide ships for the elephants. It should be loaded with hay and other food suitable for elephants on the voyage. It should have tanks holding a sufficiency of fresh water, and it should be sent to us to receive the elephants. We on our part will procure young male and female elephants. We will forward them 1 or 2 pairs at a time. He then hoped that the elephants would be released into the wild in the US, or they would help the new American nation in transport and construction. However, by the time the letter arrived, Lincoln had won the election, and the US Civil War was underway. This has led to some people wrongfully believing that the king was asking to send elephants to help in the Civil War. But Abraham Lincoln did respond to the king, saying in short, they didn't have jungles, and steam on land as well as water has been our best and most efficient agent of transportation in internal commerce, so he politely refused the gift. But there was still some Siamese influence in the US Civil War. A man named George DuPont fought in the New Jersey Volunteers. How this Siamese man got there is a bit of a mystery, as he's not mentioned on any immigration records, but he seems to be educated and may have returned with American missionaries. During the war he was present at some of the major battles like Gettysburg, but he still managed to survive and found work as a clerk afterwards. While living in Philadelphia, he was arrested with a local man for being disorderly in a pub, and after that he became an American citizen, but returned to Siam during their modernization period led by Rama V. So he was employed as a drill master. However, he made headlines when out there after he was attacked by bandits and shot in the foot. This made international headlines because he was, after all, an American citizen, and the United States found this outrageous. After some disputes, he continued to collect his US military pension until his death in 1900. So, as well as Irish and Germans and many other nationalities fighting in the US Civil War, there was also a man from Siam. But do you know of any other stranger cases of foreigners fighting in different armies? One that comes to mind for me is the Sudanese who fought alongside the French during their invasion of Mexico. But leave yours in the comments below.